My mom sat in the third row at parent-teacher night, folding and unfolding her hands in her lap, watching my dad push a mop bucket down the hallway outside the open classroom door. He was in his maroon Custodian polo with the stitched name patch that said Ray. His work boots squeaked on the linoleum. The mop made the sound it always made, that heavy, wet slap against the floor that carried down the hallway like it belonged there. Mrs. Halpern was up front, talking through the 7th grade science curriculum like nothing in the world could interrupt it. Then my dad appeared in the doorway to empty the trash can. He moved the way he always moved at work, quiet and practiced, like he was trying to take up as little space as possible. He nodded at my mom. My mom didn't nod back. She stared at the floor. There were parents in every seat, and I felt the whole room turn, just for a second, without anyone actually moving. My dad pulled the trash bag out, tied it, and carried it out like it weighed nothing. Nobody said a word. They didn't have to. When we got home that night, my mom stood in the kitchen with a suitcase and a garment bag and the kind of posture a person has when they've been rehearsing a decision for a long time. "He cleans toilets, Evan," she said, like she was reading the line from a script. "He scrubs floors at that school while your teachers step around him." She pressed her fingers to her eyes, hard enough to leave marks. "I can't sit there and watch that anymore," she said. "I can't sit in a classroom where they're talking about your potential while he's hauling trash bags past the door." My brother Dylan was already in the car. He was 15, and he had been in the car for a while. He'd packed before she told me. He knew before I did. They had been having conversations I wasn't part of. After school, when I was doing homework at the kitchen table, Dylan would be in his room with the door shut, and my mom would be on the phone with her sister, talking in a low voice about what she deserved and what she settled for and what she was finally going to change. My dad wasn't home. His shift ran from 2:30 in the afternoon to 10:30 at night. It was around 7:40 when my mom looked at me and said, "I'm leaving." She didn't say she was leaving us. Not exactly. She said she was leaving him, as if that made the rest of it simple. Then she picked up the suitcase and walked out the front door. I followed her to the porch without thinking. The taillights lit the driveway for a second. Dylan didn't wave. He didn't look back through the rear window. He was already starting the process of becoming someone who could say his father didn't exist. The house went quiet in the way houses do when they lose people suddenly. The refrigerator hummed. The kitchen clock kept ticking like it was making a point. My dad came home a little after 10:30. He smelled like floor wax and industrial cleaner, the scent that lived in his clothes and his truck and the closet by the front door. It was a smell I barely noticed anymore because it was just the background of my life. He stepped inside, still in his uniform, keys clipped to his belt. He glanced at the empty hooks by the door where my mom kept her purse and where Dylan used to hang his backpack. Then he looked at me sitting at the kitchen table. He set his lunchbox on the counter. "She left," he said. I nodded. Dylan, too. He stood there for a moment like he was waiting for something else to happen, like he expected my mom to come back in and say she forgot something. Then he unclipped his keys and set them down on the counter. A ring of keys, more than anyone should need, the kind that open doors other people don't think about. He didn't sit. He didn't ask where they went. He just said, "Did you eat?" I shook my head. "Come on," he said, already moving. "I'll make something." He made grilled cheese, 2 sandwiches. He opened a can of tomato soup and warmed it up in a pot that had a chip on the rim. We ate at the kitchen table in a house that suddenly felt too big for 3 people and too small for what had just happened. My dad didn't try to explain my mom. He didn't defend himself. He didn't say anything about the room full of parents watching him carry a trash bag out like he was part of the furniture. He just ate, and once in a while he looked at me like he was checking that I was still there. Later, when I went to bed, I heard him in the hallway for a moment, the soft clink of keys being moved, the click of the front lock being tested. Years later, I would find one more key that night connected to something I didn't understand then. It would come with a voicemail from a woman I'd never met, and a folder with my father's name typed cleanly on the tab. But that night, all I knew was this. The grilled cheese was warm. My dad was home. And the keys on the counter meant he would go back the next afternoon like the world hadn't changed at all. The next morning, my mom didn't call. Dylan didn't text. I went to school with my backpack half-zipped and my head full of static. The hallway smelled like the same floor cleaner my dad used at work. That wasn't unusual, but it hit different now, like the building had a memory of him. By the end of the day, the story was already moving faster than I could keep up with, not the details, just the shape of it. Kids don't need facts, they need a hook. Your mom left. Your brother left with her. Your dad's the custodian. They said it the way people say the weather, like it's just information, but their faces told me what they meant. The verdict was baked in. I didn't argue. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't defend my dad. I just kept my eyes on my locker combination and waited for the bell to ring. That afternoon, I got home and found my dad sitting at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad in front of him. He wasn't writing, he was just looking at it like he was deciding where to start. He looked up when I walked in. "You hungry?" he asked. That was his whole system. Food first, everything else later. I nodded, even if I wasn't. He made scrambled eggs and toast. We ate in the same quiet kitchen, and the silence didn't feel empty exactly. It felt organized, like he was keeping it under control by refusing to fill it with the wrong words. After dinner, he rinsed the dishes, dried his hands on a towel, and said, "Come with me." "Where?" I asked. "Just come." We got in his truck. The interior smelled like work, like cleaner and old coffee and the faint rubber scent of floor mats. His lunchbox sat on the passenger floorboard. The ring of keys was in the cup holder. He drove us back to the school. It was after hours. The parking lot lights made the asphalt look pale. The building sat there dark and quiet, except for a few glowing exit signs. Most people think schools stop existing when the last bell rings. They don't. They just change what they are. My dad parked near the side entrance, got out, and waved me over. He pulled out his keys, flipped through them without looking, and found the one he wanted. The metal scraped softly in the lock. The door opened with a heavy breath, like the building was waking up. Inside, the air was cooler. It smelled faintly of wax and paper and something old. He walked like he belonged there, not like a visitor, not like staff, like the building was part of his body. We went down a hallway I'd never used as a student, past the gym, past a door marked mech that I'd always assumed was off-limits to everyone, past a supply closet and a maintenance room with stacked chairs. At the end of the corridor was a plain door, no window. My dad unlocked it. The room inside was small. Concrete walls, fluorescent lights, industrial shelves packed with paper towel cases, mop heads, trash bags, bottles with warning labels. There was a utility sink with rust stains around the edges. A floor buffer sat in the corner like a sleeping animal. But in the middle of it, he'd made a space. A folding table, 2 folding chairs, a small microwave on a shelf, a mini fridge that looked like it had come from someone's basement. On the table was a portable radio. He flicked on the lights and the fluorescent hum filled the room. "This is where I eat," he said, like that explained everything. I looked at him. "You eat here?" "Most nights," he said. "It's quiet." He opened the mini fridge. There were a couple sodas, a container of leftovers, and a loaf of bread in a plastic bag. He sat down in one of the folding chairs and nodded at the other. "Sit," he said. I sat. The chair creaked. He didn't talk about my mom. He didn't talk about Dylan. He didn't ask me what kids were saying at school. Instead, he picked up a rag from a shelf, wiped down the table like it mattered, and said, "This is what we'll do." "What?" I asked. He shrugged, calm. "We'll eat. We'll talk a little. Then you go home. I finish up." I waited for the rest of the explanation. It didn't come. He just turned the radio down low. A classic rock station, soft enough to sit under the fluorescent hum. Then he reached into his lunchbox and pulled out an apple. He rolled it once between his palms and took a bite. I watched him chew. I watched the way his shoulders settled, like this room had a gravity that could keep things from spinning out. That night, we stayed there for about 20 minutes. He asked me what we did in science class. I told him. He asked if I had homework. I said yes. He nodded like that was enough information to place the day into a category. Before we left, he stood up and went to the wall where a hook was mounted. He hung his keys there, the ring clinking softly. Then he looked at me and said, Tomorrow night, you bring dinner. I blinked. I bring it? He nodded. Yeah, nothing fancy, whatever. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded back. On the drive home, he kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting near the cup holder, like the truck and the keys and the whole routine were one unit. When we got back, he walked me to the front door. Not because I needed it, because he wanted to. Then he went back to the truck. I'll be back later, he said. I watched him drive off. I stood in the doorway for a while, looking at the empty driveway and thinking about my brother sitting in a different house with my mom, and how quickly people can decide which side of a story they want to live in. The next day, I brought dinner to the supply room. A paper bag with 2 burgers and fries I'd bought with crumpled bills from my desk drawer. I got there at 9:45, like he told me. I let myself in because he'd handed me a key the night before, the smallest key on the ring, like it was no big deal. I sat at the folding table and waited. The radio was already on, low, like the room had been holding its breath until someone came back. And in the quiet between songs, I started to understand something without having words for it yet. This wasn't just where he ate. This was where he kept his life from being rewritten by people who didn't bother to look at him. Then the hallway outside went still. Footsteps, slow and familiar. Keys. A lock turning. And the door handle started to move. The door opened and my dad stepped in, wiping his hands on a shop towel. He looked tired in the ordinary way people look tired after work. Not dramatic. Just a long day that had settled into his shoulders. Then he saw the paper bag on the table. You didn't have to bring fries, he said. I shrugged. They came with it. He nodded once like that was reasonable. He hung his keys on the hook by the door, washed his hands at the utility sink, and sat down across from me. The radio hummed quietly beside the shelf. Something from the 70s I didn't recognize. We unwrapped the burgers and started eating. That became the routine. I showed up at 9:45 with food. Sometimes it was burgers, sometimes sandwiches. Once in a while, leftover spaghetti my dad reheated in the microwave. He finished his last hallway check, came into the room, washed his hands, and sat down. We ate. Then we talked about normal things, baseball scores, weather, the weird sound the pipes in the East Wing sometimes made when the heat kicked on. Which vending machine worked and which one ate your money. It was calm, predictable, almost peaceful. The kind of rhythm that slowly replaces chaos if you let it. At school, things were less peaceful. My brother had taken my mom's new husband's last name within a year. That was the cleanest way to explain it to people. Dylan Turner. No more questions. For me, the questions kept coming. Your dad still the janitor? Kids never said it like a real question. It was always half a smile, half a verdict. By 9th grade, a guy named Marcus Doyle decided it was funny to mention it whenever I walked into a room. Hey, Evan, tell your dad he missed a spot in the hallway. Or sometimes, your dad cleaned the locker room yet? The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Just loud enough for the people nearby to hear. I never answered. Not once. Silence bothered people more than anger. I learned that from watching my dad. One night in the supply room, I mentioned Marcus without using his name. There's a guy at school who likes reminding people what you do, I said. My dad took a sip of soda and set the can down. That his job? He asked. No. Then let him keep practicing, he said. That was the entire conversation. The thing about my dad was he treated problems like maintenance work. You look at them, you decide if they actually matter, then you fix them or ignore them. Most things fell into the second category. The supply room dinners continued for years. High school, trade school, the early years when I started my plumbing apprenticeship. Even when I was tired or busy, I still drove to the school in the evenings. The hallway lights always had that pale yellow glow after hours. The building felt bigger at night, quieter. Sometimes I arrived early and waited in the supply room while the radio played. That's when I noticed something. At first it was small details. The notebooks. They were stacked neatly in the metal locker against the wall. Spiral notebooks with dates written on the front in black marker. One night I asked about them. What are those? I said. My dad glanced over. Just notes, he said. Notes about what? Things I read. I didn't think much of it then. But a few weeks later I stayed later than usual. We finished dinner. My dad wiped the table and hung his keys back on the hook. "You head home," he said. "What are you doing?" "Library." I blinked. "The school library?" He nodded. "For what?" He shrugged. "Reading." It sounded normal, but the way he said it made it clear this wasn't a new thing. "How long have you been doing that?" I asked. "A while?" "A while like months?" He shook his head slightly. "Years." Then he grabbed one of the spiral notebooks from the locker and tucked it under his arm. "Lock up when you leave," he said. And he walked out. I sat there for a minute, listening to the radio and the hum of the fluorescent lights. Then curiosity got the better of me. I stood up and walked over to the locker. The door was still open. Inside were stacks of notebooks going back further than I expected. I picked up the top one. The first page was filled with neat handwriting, not messy notes, organized, headings, diagrams, numbers. It looked like something from a college class, plumbing code references, electrical load calculations, sketches of building frames, and further in the notebook, pages of numbers, columns, property prices, rental estimates, interest rates. I flipped a few more pages. There were notes about zoning laws, property taxes, something called tax lien auctions. I didn't understand most of it, but one thing was clear. This wasn't casual reading. This was studying, real studying. For a long time. I closed the notebook and slid it back into the locker just as I heard footsteps in the hallway. My dad's footsteps. Slow. Steady. He stepped into the room and saw me standing by the locker. For a moment he didn't say anything. Then he nodded toward the door. "Ready?" I nodded back. We walked out together. Neither of us mentioned the notebooks, but that night on the drive home, I started realizing something that had never occurred to me before. My dad might have been the quietest man I knew, but quiet didn't mean simple, and it definitely didn't mean unaware. Years later, a lawyer would place a folder in front of me and say a sentence that would change how I understood every dinner in that supply room. But that realization started much earlier. It started with those notebooks, and the library, and the fact that my father was studying something nobody had ever imagined he would understand. For a long time, I didn't ask my dad about the notebooks again, not because I forgot about them, because I understood, in a quiet way, that they belonged to a system I hadn't been invited into yet. My dad had a way of letting things unfold when they were ready. He never rushed explanations. He never lectured. He let people observe until the picture made sense on its own, so the routine stayed the same. I brought dinner. We sat at the folding table between the shelves of paper towels and cleaning supplies. The radio played softly, and when we finished eating, he hung his keys on the hook and walked down the hall toward the library with one of those spiral notebooks tucked under his arm.